Everyone checking in on the USMJ names, there's a whole bunch of them. We're going to look at the weekly time frame first, and first off, we have to note that the S&P 500 is starting to consolidate, and it's essential to be watching the S&P 500 over the next week to see whether we get continuation and confirmation of a daily downtrend, or whether the weekly time frame gives us brief consolidation and then continuation for the bulls. That's going to have a very significant impact on what the sector does, in my opinion. So we'll start it off with the big boy, GWPH, who got the new all-time high this week. Not a whole bunch of follow-through, just a percent or so over that all-time high into consolidation. The consolidation is not surprising due to what the overall market was doing. Anything above 140.44 maintains the weekly uptrend. So the weekly uptrend is likely to remain intact here. And the daily chart, pretty healthy consolidation overall. This is one to be watching for a potential entry early this coming week. There's a gap to fill down to 153.25, but that doesn't mean we need to fill it at this point in time. We've seen 4 days of consolidation. We have a tightening range with a daily inside bar, and that tells us the hourly time frame is leveling off a little bit. So the bulls want to see a break of 166.19 and 166.95 to enter an area with a lack of resistance in the low to mid 170s. That would indicate, if we get that bull break, that our daily higher low has been established at 160.24, and we would then look for a lower high perhaps to be set in the mid 170s. So daily uptrend, weekly uptrend still intact, healthy consolidation after the gap up and new all-time high, and the bulls are looking for a daily higher low to be established. IIPR, similar scenario. This one has pulled back 20+% from the all-time high, looking for a weekly higher low to form. Anything above 59.56 gives the bulls that weekly higher low, so they have a lot of space to work with. And I just made an entry on Friday for an initial position on IIPR on the gap down open. I entered at about 67. I still have another position ready to go if we drop down into the lower 60s. But at this point, I will not add. I'll just hold on to my core position if we do get the bounce follow through, because I'm not looking to be a hero on this trade. I'm looking to sell for a daily lower high, perhaps somewhere. Initial target depends on what the S&P 500 does, as always, but I would be looking in the $74, $75 range for that potential profit taking. So same thing, a daily higher low is looking to form, a weekly higher low as well. We have to change the hourly trend, which we did with a little bit of a base of support and then continuation into the end of the day. And if the bulls can get a convincing break of 70 on Monday, we will very clearly change that hourly trend, and the bounce will be underway to look for that daily lower high to be set. CURA, significant pullback. We're watching for a long, drawn-out weekly equilibrium at this point with our all-time high, all-time low, lower high with the inability to break the new all-time high, and now significant pullback, and we're going to be looking for a higher low to form in the $7 to $8 range on this weekly time frame. The daily chart has been pulling back very significantly. We bounced on Friday with the rest of the sector, but we didn't get a strong follow-through on that bounce. We ended up with a bounce first thing after the bell rang, and then we dropped down to a lower low. And the vast majority of individual names in both the Canadian and US sector did not see a lower low in the afternoon. So that stood out, setting CURA apart as one of the weaker names on this bounce attempt. We now have a new level where anything under 874 is just a lower high, and it's worth watching for a shift in momentum, keeping in mind that when we bounce, we're just going to be looking for a daily lower high to be set due to all of this profit taking and all of the bear volume behind it over the last 7 days. So for me personally, I will be interested in this name only on the weekly time frame. That's the time frame where I'm going to be looking for the clarity to form. I would maybe be interested to be looking to make a bull entry if we were to drop down into the low $7 range. But aside from that, I'm just going to wait the months that it may take for this weekly time frame to tighten up and then give us an eventual clear break. And if you're looking at the MJ names compared to the US names compared to the Canadian names, it's clear that the U.S. names have pulled back a little bit more significantly, and they started consolidation a little bit sooner. So here's GTII, which is still looking to form a higher low compared to 1460 to maintain the weekly uptrend. Any name that loses the weekly uptrend clearly stands out because so many names are in weekly uptrends at this point. The daily time frame here has been pulling back significantly 7 days in a row. The high volume climax signaling the potential of a temporary bottom and the close up at the high of the day. So we have to change the hourly trend. We had the low, we did a little higher low at 1587, and then here's the bull shift in momentum. Early next week, we got to break 1685 for this bounce to have follow through. And again, we're just going to be looking for a daily lower high to form. For these names that have pulled back this significantly, to change the daily trend, we have to bounce and set a lower high, pullbacks at a higher low, and then change the daily trend. So the daily trend is not going to shift back to the bulls anytime soon. It's going to take a bare minimum of at least a week of development, in my opinion, and the size of these bounces are going to give us a lot of information. If we can only get a small bounce up towards the low 17s, the odds of a lower high and lower low are more likely than if the bulls were able to make a bounce up towards 18 and create more space to try and form that higher low. So the next couple days on these bounces and the hourly time frame are going to be key, because when the hourly bounce uptrend is lost, that's when our daily lower high is looking to be set. TRUL, another name that's pulled back, but we're going to form a weekly higher low on this chart because we bounced straight from the low with no weekly consolidation, and it's the S&P 500 that is marking when that weekly consolidation is taking place. Daily time frame here has been trying to bounce for 2 days. We had the laws in Florida shift a little bit, at least pass through Congress, that smokable MJ is going to be allowed, which is a bonus to all the companies operating in Florida. TRUL has a big Florida imprint, so that has to pass the Senate still, but certainly would be beneficial for the company. You can see there's a lot of bull volume on this bounce attempt. Our higher low is 1540, and the bulls have to break 1602 to see the clear hourly trend change. Again, then we zoom out. If we change the hourly trend, anything under 1749 would just be a lower high on the daily time frame. So step number 1, change the hourly trends. Step number 2, zoom out to the daily and anticipate likely daily lower highs are going to be set. GGB on the weekly time frame got a bear break of 470, so a weekly little lower high and lower low, but we got no follow through at this point. And if the bulls show up, the lack of follow through on that weekly time frame means zoom out for the potential of a flag. And this is a very healthy monthly consolidation at this point. We don't have much trading history to be going off of, but if we do not get much follow through from here, and if the bulls are able to bounce back up into the mid $5 range, this is going to be a healthy longer term setup of healthy consolidation. And we know that on the daily time frame, the bounce started with the big bullish reversal doji on Thursday, solid follow through on Friday. Have to change the daily trend. Anything under 1511 is just a lower high. If we change the daily trend, again, I am going to be interested in GGB longer term. We will still look for, again, if we break the daily lower highs by breaking 1511 or make that 511, we zoom out on the weekly, and we're still going to look for a weekly lower high compared to 599, and it will be the change in trend on the weekly time frame that has us looking back to that all-time high. So keeping a close eye on GGB, because again, we've already seen a month of consolidation while the rest of the sector is on week number 1 or 2 of consolidation. MRMD, I like this one for a nice tight daily pattern. You can see the weekly time frame has multiple inside bars just showing the sideways trading, and we're going to be looking for a break early this coming week on MRMD. We have the low of the dump, high of the bounce, higher low, pretty much a double top at $4. So 368 is our most important support level. If we turn around our momentum from here and break $4, we'll have a new higher low on the daily at 380, but we have to break $4 to shift this momentum. And after $4, it's 408, 414, 422. So there's a few resistances after that $4 level, but it's clear that a break of the $4 level will change the daily trend back to the bulls. We've been seeing lower highs and lower lows for weeks. Solid bounce, didn't change any trend. Higher low, need the higher high. Don't like the liquidity of MRMD. I did look to trade it last week, and the bid and ask spread are not ideal. The amount of dollar volume is not ideal, so it is a little bit more difficult to trade, and I would be using smaller position sizes if I were doing so. HARV looking for a weekly higher low to be established. We knew it was coming because the last weekly higher low was 657. Bulls had a ton of space to work with, but we also ran really hard and didn't establish a lot of support on the way up. So the daily bounce is underway with a gap down buying on Friday. As we can see, we had a very strong bullish reversal candlestick on Tuesday as well that got no follow through. So we need that follow through. Let's look at the Tuesday example. We broke the hourly lower highs. We never confirmed the trend change with a higher low and higher high. So here we are changing the trend with the higher low and higher high, which makes it a different setup than it was back on Tuesday. So 827 is now the most important short-term support. The break of 864 is a start for the bulls. 9 psychological is the next resistance. So the hourly trend has changed, which means we zoom out to the daily time frame, and we can say that on the daily, anything under 969 is just a lower high. So we're not going to change this daily trend anytime soon, but the size of the bounce is going to indicate whether it is likely the bulls are able to form a daily higher low and try to change this trend sometime late next week or early 2 weeks from now. And if we change the daily trend, then we know our weekly higher low has been established, and we would then look for a weekly equilibrium to form into April if that ends up being the case. OH, pretty healthy, but a double top of resistance. 990 is that double top, 990 and 994. So the weekly higher low has clearly been established at 857. That's the most important weekly support, and we're looking for this follow through, but unable to get it at this point. So there's our support, there's our double top of resistance. On the daily time frame, we pulled back significantly. It was a gap up open right on top of resistance, so we didn't get much follow through. Hard pullback, but a significant buying of the dip again to defend 857 support. And now the question is, how are we going to break this tightening range? I'm looking at 857 is the low, 994 is the high, 872 is the higher low, and we'll see if early this week we set a lower high compared to 990 and form a daily equilibrium. Because if that's the case, if we tighten up on the daily and then get this bull break, it's going to be a great sign on this weekly time frame to have us looking back towards that all-time high. So keep an eye on OH outperforming a lot of its peers by maintaining the weekly uptrend, even though we have been consolidating for a month before this previous week. MMEN, MedMen. So MedMen we know is the weakest USM MJ name out of the major names that we're watching here on this chart. The weekly lower high of 506. We set a new weekly lower high at 447. We're breaking supports. The only support left is 346 and then the all-time low of 311. That's not a comfortable space to be in. We know that if we lose 10%, we're going to be right on top of that all-time low. So if we look at the daily time frame, we've had the bearish reaction ever since earnings. We had a solid bounce just like everybody else in the sector, but what stands out is we gave back the vast majority of this bounce. So yes, the short-term high-risk, high-reward plays are there, but no, the bulls could not get any follow-through. 355, key support to be watching on Monday, and our new resistance level is 387. So gains are short-lived, lack of follow-through, but we'll see if the bulls can give us a weekly equilibrium, or I should say an hourly equilibrium, if 355 support can hold on Monday and we make another bounce attempt up towards the 370s. KSHB on the weekly time frame, we have our low. This is an equilibrium setup, not picture perfect, but it's still there. So the low, high of the bounce, higher low, lower high was 649. And we were looking for that lower high. If you look back 2 weeks ago with the videos where you're talking about KSHB, we knew that a weekly lower high was the most likely scenario. So when you determine the longer term most likely scenario, it's a lot easier to hone in on the shorter term time frames and look for the details that are following through to give that play or give that most likely setup. So we have set our lower high at 649, and now we're looking for the higher low compared to 499 for this weekly equilibrium to continue to tighten up. Not much of a bounce attempt on Friday like the rest of the sector attempted to see, and we did break 555 support. So it's going to be up to the bulls to shift this momentum to give us that weekly higher low. But this is another one of those charts, just like Cura, where I'm just going to zoom out and be patient and wait for the weekly pattern to develop and tighten and give us an eventual break. So worth watching for a potential entry off of 499 support if we do keep pulling back towards that level, but otherwise patiently waiting for some time in April or May when this weekly pattern is going to tighten up enough for a break. CVSI, weekly time frame, bulls buying the dip in a significant way. So we're looking for the weekly higher low to be established. So here on the weekly higher lows, we have 333, another one at 380, another one at 405. And here you would say, why isn't this another support level? And it's a little bit nitpicky. You could say this was the higher low and then this was the bounce attempt. But when I look at these candlesticks, I see that we didn't really have any kind of meaningful bounce attempt. It was more just sideways trading. We didn't see, when I'm looking for higher lows to clearly be established, I want to see a pivot point where the bears are pushing the price down and the bulls say, all right, we're done. We're now looking for a bounce. So if we pulled back to here and we got a bounce follow through and we made it up over 510 to try and see this bounce follow through, and then we pushed down, I would call that a change of the weekly trend and a loss of the uptrend. But because that bounce never had any meaningful follow through behind it to see these bulls try and bounce, I'm still calling this a weekly higher low at 433. And if we get follow through of any means this coming week up over $5, that will be enough of that follow through and pivot off of this level that I would consider that a significant bounce attempt and our new higher low being established. So we have clear resistance at 506, 504, 510. So right over the $5 psychological level, but it's a very significant buying of the dip on big bull volume back on Friday, and it's one of those scenarios where we see a bear break of support and a lack of follow through, and we're going to be watching these key resistances this coming week after a very significant 10% plus bounce from those lows. So keep an eye on CVSI because this weekly uptrend is still in favor of the bulls. And let's look at it on the monthly time frame to see if it gives us any more clarity. And the answer is no, it does not, at least for me. So it's all about 510. If the bulls can break 510, it will be meaningful. If not, we're going to look for this range to continue tightening up. NBEV. NBEV has been consolidating at this point for over a month, and we have lost the weekly uptrend. So here's that scenario where we pulled back, we hit a pivot point of the bulls forming that higher low, and we got bounce follow through, and then we lost that support. So for me, when we lose the weekly support, I look for longer term patterns, longer term time frames for clarity. And this monthly time frame is very clear for me on NBEV. So this is the time frame I'm going to use because it's a pattern I've recognized 1,000 times in my trading career of the equilibrium. Low of the pullback, high of the raging bull move, higher low, lower high, and now we're looking for a monthly higher low to form compared to 303. There's tons of space for the bulls to form this higher low. It might take one candlestick to form. It might take 2 months to form, but I'm just going to keep this one on the back burner and say, all right, I will be interested in an NBEV if I can get an entry opportunity where I like the risk to reward, looking for the monthly higher low. Other than that, I'm just going to wait for this monthly equilibrium to break sometime, perhaps June, July, August, later in the summer, once it has more time to tighten up. So this is one, and I'm doing this for gold as well, for gold and gold miners. There's a monthly equilibrium forming, so I know that sometime in the next year it will develop, and this is where I just keep an eye on longer term plays and don't get overwhelmed checking in on it every day because I know I don't need to, but check in on it maybe once or twice a week, and then as we get close to the break, you know that break will be imminent, and we get ready for the trade to come to us. So short-term support, 471, and for psychological after that, the daily time frame has just been a series of clear lower highs and lower lows. Anything under 599 is just a lower high on this current bounce attempt, and we have to change the daily trend as step number one. And even when we change the daily trend, we know the weekly chart is still just going to likely form a lower high. So step number one, change the daily trend before the bulls have any kind of momentum on NBEV. IAN has now started its pullback. This is another name where we know that we are going to have to sit through some consolidation if you're holding this because we bounced straight off the low from December and saw no weekly consolidation on the way up. So now we're getting this weekly consolidation to look for that higher low to establish, and we need the daily trend to change back in favor of the bulls for us to find that new weekly higher low. This daily trend is not going to change anytime soon. Anything under 742 is just a lower high, and that's a long way away, over 10%. So it's a bullish reversal candlestick on the daily from Friday. Bulls bought the dip like the majority of the sector, but we're going to anticipate a daily lower high compared to 742 is going to form. We have to see a solid bounce to give space for the bulls to try and form the higher low and higher high daily trend change. And if it's not a solid bounce, it's entirely possible that we just see another little daily lower high and continuation of consolidation to continue searching for that weekly higher low. So the size of the bounce is going to be very telling, and that's what we're looking for on the S&P 500 as well. Bullish candlestick on Friday after the gap down open, similar across the board with the sector, and the question is how much follow through does the bounce get? C-Web on the daily time frame, or actually the weekly, tightening up, but favoring the bears with the week close. So we look at it on the daily chart, and I can see the must-hold support is 751 for the bulls, because if we lose 751, then we're just going to be looking at further weekly consolidation. Ideal scenario is bulls hold 1751 and then break $20 to change this daily trend, give us the clear weekly higher low established. But because of how close we are to support and how close or how far we are from resistance, we know that the odds favor the bears, especially with the increasing bear volume. So if we break 1751, we're looking down really at 1594 is the next major clear support level, and we'll need a daily trend change to indicate the weekly higher low has been established. And last, we'll wrap it up with CL coming off the all-time high with significant consolidation, looking for a daily higher low to form because the bulls had tons of space to work with. You could say the daily uptrend was lost here at 1155, but I'm looking down at 973 is the most important support level for me, and I would anticipate the bulls are going to hold that level. Bounce day Friday, just like everybody else in the sector, and we have an hourly higher low at 1066, and the bulls have to break 1138 to change this trend. You can tell just by the 2 weeks on this hourly candlestick, it's thinly traded. There's a wide bid and ask spread, and that's not ideal trading for larger capital, but It's a blue sky bull or coming off a blue sky breakout, and we're just looking for another weekly higher low to form. So it's certainly one of the stronger names in the sector due to its prolonged uptrend on the weekly time frame. So there's some nice setups in there. Short-term setups like MRMD, long-term setups like these monthly time frames for NBEV and Cura. And we'll see if IIPR can get some follow through on this bounce, looking for that lower high in the mid 70s to lock in that profit. And we'll check back in as always. Have a good weekend. Do some good things out there. It is Saturday. We'll see you Monday. So chapter 6 of the adventure, we had headed west. We hit Boulder, and I was staying with that woman. Got the house sitting gig for a month. And I actually did trade a bit when I had that house sitting gig because I had stable internet and I had a routine and I could be more focused on it. So I was still trading penny stocks at that point. This was maybe 5-6 years ago. And I had a couple weeks until I started house sitting, so I explored Colorado. That's the kind of green you want to see. Tons of places to camp, tons of things to see. Utah and Colorado is a great chunk of land. And I haven't explored northern Utah. I wanted to. I had a road trip that was planned through northern Utah, through the northwest part of the country. I'm going to have to put that on my next to-do list later this summer. First, I'm going to be going back to Colorado in May, so I will bring my camera. All these pictures are with my phone. But I'll bring my camera and I'm going to explore a bit more of Colorado and see some shows at the Red Rocks and have some fun. But that's for another time. So this time around, plenty of places to camp. My favorite part about Colorado is that there are rivers, so many places coming off of mountains. And so that made two things very easy. Number one, getting the fresh water and filtering it to drink. And then number two, being able to have things. You don't want to be, have a cooler and have food that needs to be kept cool when you're road tripping across the country. It's just constantly needing ice and then those plastic bags. And it's just, when you have ice cold water coming off the mountain, I would just pull over and fill up my cooler with cold water and then put stuff that needed refrigeration in it. And then, 12 hours later, 20 hours later, I can just dump that water out and refill it with other cold water. So the water in Colorado is not for swimming. You can jump in and enjoy it for a brief amount of time, but it is very cold coming off of those mountains, especially in May and June. And I believe it was June now, heading towards July. But tons of great places to camp and lots of solitude. My favorite part about getting to a place that was a couple miles into the trail and had a nice clearing like this where, it's just a lake and the forest is knowing that at about 4 or 5 p.m., no new people are going to be getting up to that spot. And that's because you can't hike up there and have enough time to get back before it's getting dark. So there's this lull time before it gets dark where everybody stops coming up. And so you have it to yourself during that dusk time when the sun's going down. This is the baby elk that I snuck up on. And again, it's just being still and very slowly moving. It's just a game of watching animals and trying to get close to them. There were no mothers or fathers around, which was good. So there's plenty of spots like this all over, and I can't stress enough how if you go to freecampingsites.net and you look at BLM land, and BLM land is the same as National Forest land to a certain degree. It's government owned. There's very little regulation on camping in terms of where you can camp, and it's just this big public lands that we have to take advantage of. This, I believe, is getting towards Rocky Mountain National Park, one of the spots near the entrance. These are marmots, so pretty much a giant squirrel, if I had to describe them, somewhat like a raccoon, but they would live under the rocks, and you could tell what rocks they lived under because the rim around it was all bright green and lush, and the grass, immediately after the rocks was a little bit dry and arid. And that's because of their waste. They just pop out of their hole and they go to the bathroom, and that, fertilizes all the plants that are around their rock. So you can tell where they live, and they were curious and friendly. If you pee on a rock, they really enjoy the salt and the water, and they'll run and lick it up. And their lives, they just live in areas like this where that's all they know. That's their life. They sit on their rock and they overlook the expanse. There would be times where I would be alone in a spot and I would sit there and a marmot would jump up on his rock and he'd just be observing everything with me and just hanging out in the dusk. And they get curious if you don't move. So if I sat there for an hour, he might, get used to my presence and come and check me out and see what's going on once he realizes that I'm not a threat. So that's the start of Colorado. We'll continue going westward over the Rocky Mountain National Park. Looking forward to going back there again in May, and open to any suggestions of places. I'm probably going to hit up Telluride, Steamboat Springs, and Rocky Mountain National Park, Boulder. I'm going to see Papadosio in Red Rocks. I got a buddy in that band, and Random Rab and Polish Ambassador opening up. So that should be a fun show. That'll be in a few months, and I'll be sure to bring you all along. So have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you over the weekend.